Okay, welcome back to our second webinar on TBM. We did a pre-webinar before we went to the TBM conference, and this is like the follow-up webinar, and we're going to give you the takeaways that we got from the webinar. First of all, an introduction. My name is Sander den Hartog. I'm the CEO of CostPerform, and today I'm not joined by Mahmoud, one of our esteemed partners, but I'm joined by Bert-Jan. Bert-Jan, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Bert-Jan de Gier, the CTO for CostPerform, and I've been working for the company for over 20 years now.
So anything that our clients or the market ask from us in terms of solutions on TBM or anywhere else, EBM, we're going to talk about that later. You are the one with your team who is actually making that. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And you've been doing that for 20 years, you're saying. So all like the beginning of the first lines of codes were already in your hands.
Correct, yeah.
And just as a little bit of indication, how big is the development team now?
Development team is 5 people, and we have a code base of over 500,000 lines.
Oh yeah, so it's a long way coming for everything we do on TBM modeling. Okay, during this webinar, you have the possibility to ask questions. We have people from, I think, expert services just behind the chat, so they will try to answer your questions in real time. If there are too many, it might take a while, but they will be answered. And during this webinar, apart from the question and answer session, we'll also do a little bit of a practical example. We keep that short, 15 minutes max, to show you some practical applications of TBM within CostPerform tooling, and also a little bit of a pass-through looking at EBM and how the two tie together. And we do that a little bit in a question of answer session as well, because we do have the person next to us who programmed everything, so we'd like to make use of that. The webinar is a little bit about what we've seen at the TBM conference. This year it was held in San Diego, in sunny San Diego. Now we have actually experienced it ourselves because we rented a beautiful house close to the beach, and indeed San Diego, it is a very beautiful place to live, and you can see that on the prices as well. Everything was expensive, but we really liked it. It was a 3-day conference packed with a lot of sessions on anything around IT costing, IT cost allocation, expense management, a lot about like cloud elements, a lot about, I would say, on how to deal with your different infrastructure cost compared to your actual like license cost of different areas. It's just pretty broad and topics, but then again, yeah, pretty small because it was only on IT finance focused. First of all, you've spent in a lot of sessions. What kind of people did you saw walking around at the floor where all the sessions were held?
It was a very diverse crowd, mostly American, but also quite a few internationals.
You did speak to quite some Dutch people.
Yeah, exactly. There were a lot of partners present, but from the...
What do you mean by partners?
People that, like consultancy firms, but also software vendors, everything regarding professional services around TPM. So that, and then for the rest of the audience, it was the majority were end users within the TBM. I don't know.
In the TBM space.
Yeah,
in the space. Yeah. And maybe it's good to mention, just not to walk away from the elephant in the room, it was a TBM Council hosted event, but the TBM Council is pretty much sponsored and backed by Aptio, a sort of like, in certain areas, competitive company of ours. But we really applaud them because they have created the whole TBM market. And you could see that, I would say like 60-70% of the audience was a Aptio client.
Yep, that's correct, yes. Or considering to become
one. And they did a fantastic job in branding that whole event. And this was one of the first years that they opened up the event for other vendors as well, to really like give a little bit of body on the idea of having a, I would say, open standard when it comes to TBM. And we were one of the first vendors to participate, which was really nice. Hey, in terms of people, you said they were end users. If you would have to look, where would they sit within the organization? What would be their normal roles and where would they reside?
It was quite varied. There were a lot of people that are actually working with well, in most cases, Aptio to configure the model.
So like TBM experts, TBM...
Exactly.
What is it? I don't know what kind of roles they would have, but they would be TBM drivers, TBM, yeah.
Yeah, doing the actual work. But there were also people who were more in closer to the CIO or CFO position.
It is a funny thing you mentioned, because you say CIO, CFO. Logically, this is a lot of finance driven, but were these guys like more into the IT side of the house or the finance side of the house? What would you reckon?
I would say it could be about 50-50.
Okay, so some of them would roll up to the CIO and maybe the other half would roll up to the CFO.
Yes, I would say, based on who I've spoken to and what I've seen.
Yeah, that's actually interesting because the whole idea behind TBM is, of course, to have a better discussion between IT and the business so that they know what are we paying for. The end idea is to have a bill of IT where you can have a unit price times a volume in a certain period that people really understand what they're paying for. Mm-hmm. And logically that could be driven by IT to determine, hey, what are we actually delivering? But what you're saying, it's also like halfly driven by finance because they are probably the guys and women that determine unit cost. Is that a little bit the reason?
I would say so, yes.
Okay, interesting. Hey, and one of the things that I've heard is that it was mostly mentioned, of course, the TBM all around IT unit cost allocation, but there was a lot of buzz or a few sessions around the term EBM, standing for, instead of technology business management, enterprise business management. You being an attendee of a few sessions, what do you make of that?
Well, it was interesting to see that, EBM was not officially part of any announcements. There were quite a few sessions on it, and it gathered some buzz around the conference, even though as a term it's been around for 7 or more years, I would say.
How would you describe it? What would you, I mean, now that you've been to a few sessions as a term, what have you learned as a definition of EBM?
Well, it basically continues. It's beyond IT costing. So you take other costs into consideration as well as part of the costs of your products and services.
And if you talk about other costs, could you give some examples?
It could be related, but not exactly IT costs. So it could be close, like your service desk, help desk, things like that. But you can also think about...
Those are usually already like a little bit into the TBM realm. I remember one of our clients, BT, really using that as a what is it, a sort of like number of tickets being solved for certain departments. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But you can also think about other roles, labor costs, housing, things like that.
And is that then labor cost, housing within IT, or also, for example, within finance or HR or, I don't know, management, things like that?
In theory, it would be anything, all of your entire cost base.
Yeah, have you seen, I mean, that is something that is pretty much up our alley here, because we have actually always been an EBM company where we do specialize a lot in IT costing because a lot of demand is going there. But have you seen some live examples or some examples of discussions in those sessions?
Not much, not too concrete. It was more on a conceptual level, and then it varied a little bit between discussions around what could be added, so what additional cost categories or types could be included. Where it was more concrete, it was more closer to IT, as I mentioned, service desk, professional services, in companies where it was not part of the initial TBM modeling that they did. In this case, that was like the next step they were planning to take.
Okay, but still pretty much around the IT realm.
Yeah.
That's where the examples were tailored to that.
Yeah, but I think so. From a maturity perspective, you can understand if coming from TBM, it's imaginable that you start with the things that are closest to your IT costs and then expand further from there.
Yeah, and one of the strongholds of TBM is the fact that they have a certain specific taxonomy. Remember, in the last webinar, we discussed that taxonomy quite a bit, and that is pretty like laid out what is compute, what is storage, what is memory, things like that. In IT, they have done a very good job on that layout, and I can imagine if you could close like a service desk, and maybe they have like different categorizations of the service desk, medium tickets, high tickets, low tickets, I don't know. But if you would go beyond the IT realm and you go to finance, paying an invoice, handling a customer complaint, whether or not that's in finance, probably not, but in HR, for example, you could think of creating a contract, operating a paycheck, that could also be helping with appraisal talks, things like that. Mm-hmm. But as you see, I'm already like stuttering a little bit to find out a good taxonomy in there. Yeah. How do you think they have to deal with that?
Well, I think there are some things that are common to most organizations. As you mentioned, most organizations have personnel, so they'll have a salary administration, they'll have to do some hiring, so contracts, stuff like that, if you just stick to the HR examples. But beyond that, of course, depending on industry, perhaps company size, things will start to vary a lot between companies. So while a taxonomy, like the TBM taxonomy, is very useful, I think it's much more applicable to something like IT, because it's quite common, at least at the highest level, over all companies that have IT costs, and who doesn't these days. But
then who doesn't have a HR department?
Exactly. But beyond HR, beyond the most common things, it'll start to become a lot more difficult to create a common taxonomy, as was
let
created
alone going one step further than just, I would say, the supporting departments. When you go to primary processes, that's probably completely company specific.
Exactly, yeah. So I could imagine that it would be on perhaps an industry-based EBM taxonomy. I can imagine something like that, But as I hear you and what I've seen from the sessions myself, it's very far off from the detailed level of the TBM taxonomy. Yes. I have not seen or heard anything during the conference or outside about an EBM taxonomy either being created or being available. Okay. Well, maybe that's something that's a sort of greenfield area for us to be more present, because we do have a lot of clients, over 100 clients that do actually already EBM, and maybe we can, together with these clients, create standards on those different support departments, and maybe industry specific things like that. That might be... Absolutely, since we are featured in a lot of different industries, we have some experience there, so we have a lot of experience there. Would you then create a separate sort of template or versions? I mean, that's your area as the development department. I can imagine either happening. Probably start out with templating first, and then if that is indeed successful, and depending on the level of detail and specificity of the industry or the specific industry templates, we could indeed, I can imagine having an industry-specific version of CostPerform. Okay, maybe it would be a good idea to, and I'd love our opinion of our viewers on that as well. We are hosting our costing conference at the 2nd and 3rd of October 2025. This could be a topic of discussion with everybody who's present there to see how we can create taxonomies like that. Definitely, would love to have some outside input for that. On that event. That's a very good occasion. Okay, perfect. Let's pivot a little bit back to TBM, because that's what the conference was a little bit more about. One of the things that I find nowadays better, because I've been there, but before I went, I was hearing a lot of different terms on cloud management, expense analysis. I would see
planning and control of your IT cost, a bill of IT as we would call it. What do you make of it in terms of what are the difference, the pros and the cons of these?
There are really three different areas, basically. You've got your cloud management, cloud expense management, and your IT finance. So cloud management is all around the resources and their usage. So making sure that you're right-sizing the resources that you have available in your multi-cloud environment, perhaps. It could be single cloud as well.
And that is like instantly, or is that?
Could be. It's definitely, the tooling in that area is definitely focused on making it easier to manage the resources that you're using. So making sure that it's right-sized, so not under-provisioned, where you risk degraded performance or even outages. You don't want to over-provision either, because then you're paying for capacity you're not using. So you want to have that as right-sized as possible, and there's tooling to do that, to make it easier to do that, or even automate things based on certain configuration items, thresholds, where it automatically scales up or down.
Yeah. Hey, I remember speaking to one of the Gartner analysts, because you have to imagine that there's also a lot of analysts and I would say people that do vendor reviews at that conference as well. And Robert Nakler from Gartner, he made this beautiful picture on the division between those three: expense management, cloud management, and tooling around planning and control. Maybe it's a good idea to have a look at that and have a little bit of a vision throughout that picture.
Yeah.
Okay, like we discussed, a slide which we can see now, and was, like I said, it was made by Gartner. Robert did a good job on that. That tries to make a little bit of a division between those three elements. Could you elaborate a little bit on the things that you've seen, also based upon what you've heard at the conference?
Yes, definitely. So I already went into the cloud management platforms. Yeah. So the next one is cloud expense management, and that's much more looking at your consumption, your cloud spend. So what resources are you consuming? What are you paying for that? And it also involves a lot of the commitments. So in for instance, AWS savings plans, where you commit to a certain cloud spend at a reduced rate, obviously. And the main thing here is
and the idea is that the bigger your commit, the bigger your discount on the normal prices.
Exactly, yeah. Correct. And also the better your coverage of your actual spend, your actual resource usage, of course, the better price you get, because beyond the committed resources, you pay an on-demand rate, which is higher.
Yeah.
But then again, if you overcommit and you pay for resources that you don't use, that's of course also a waste of money.
That's a waste of money as well, yeah.
You don't want that.
Hey, I was discussing with our own AWS account manager earlier today. She was in the office. And one of the things that she told me is to up your commit a little bit, because if you have a higher commit, you get a higher discount. And one of the things she told me, one of the things to up your commit, so to get that overall number higher, is also to make use of anything that is on the AWS marketplace. So say, for example, that you're spending, 10 million on your infrastructure costs from AWS, but then the threshold for an extra discount is at 12 million. He said what you can do is you can actually then services like, for example, Salesforce or CostPerform or others that you would actually acquire through AWS Marketplace could get you to that 12 million. Because otherwise you would have paid it directly anyway.
Correct, yeah.
Was there any discussion on that also, like the integration between infrastructure and marketplace costs?
No, you're correct. Indeed, you can. We see a lot of companies that have a quite large commitment agreement with, for instance, AWS, and they can use a part of that to purchase software. So not just cloud resources, including indeed CostPerform. That was not mentioned at all during the TBM conference. No.
So it's like a little bit of a greenfield area still, because otherwise it would have been a higher topic.
Yeah, but also if you look at the cloud expense management part, you're looking at your recurring costs, and it's also variable based on your usage, while purchasing software like Salesforce, like CostPerform is not something you do 20 times.
No, but then again, it's recurring cost as well.
True, I mean, but on a yearly basis.
On a yearly basis, yeah. And this is more on a like daily basis or something?
Daily, or maybe even more than that. This is for predicting your peaks and accommodating your commitments, for instance, to be able to handle those peaks at a beneficial rate. That is, different than purchasing software, which you pay for once a year.
Yeah, interesting. So if I understand it correctly, the cloud management is really operational, turning off and turning on elements. Then the expense management is really financial driven, is getting close to your commitments, or trying to be as balanced as possible.
Optimizing a cloud spend.
Yeah.
And I do see the line between the two blurring. There are things where cloud expense management tools are able to, for instance, manage the commitments automatically based on spend. So if you see an increased spend, they can purchase additional commitments for a certain period. I would not be surprised if that line will blur even further in the future.
Okay, interesting. Hey, and the IT financial management, that's mostly our area. What have you seen there? And I mean, what is the little bit of pace of change, but also the pace of usage at a client level of that? I mean, that's probably not as per minute or per second as we've seen in the cloud management, the cloud expense management. What's your idea on that?
Yeah, incorrect. The frequency of that is a lot lower. I would say that it is. You'll seldom see a higher frequency than on a monthly basis. Looking at it's of course most of it is historic. Looking back, allocating expense, seeing how much did we spend on what, how do we allocate these costs to the products and services. There's some accountability questions that you have there as well, of course.
Because that's what you get when you get a bill of IT, then you know exactly who is spending what and who's driving the cost of IT, which business units are actually, for example, making the most use of data, making the most use of compute.
Yeah, indeed. And then if you're looking at these interdepartmental charges, for instance, you don't get that on an hourly basis. You do that probably monthly. Although it would be interesting to see your usage throughout the month as a department consuming intra-company services, to see how far you are along, for instance, a budget that you have for that specific area. Then again, there's also of course, the forward-looking aspect of IT finance management, doing some forecasting, maybe what-if analysis. If you've got everything mapped out correctly, you'll be able to see quite quickly what changes in your technology landscape would mean for your products and services, or increased spend, or perhaps pricing changes.
Interesting. Hey, and the interesting part of this always, and I then referred back to the EBM discussion, I can imagine, of course, that especially that IT finance management is the one that would integrate best with your EBM endeavors, because that would usually also be on a monthly basis. I cannot imagine seeing expense management for salary administration being a minute thing. No, that's typically, of course, a monthly thing. So the rhythm of IT finance management works best in the whole EBM space, would be my opinion.
Correct. And also the purpose of IT finance management ties in nicely with EBM. If you're looking at your total cost of ownership, you don't want to look solely at your IT costs. You want to preferably include all of your costs to get the complete picture, because you might want to trade off, you might want to use IT to cut down on some labor costs. If you just look at IT, your costs will be growing, whereas if you look at the entire picture, your total cost may be.
Yeah, interesting. Yep, interesting. Good way of looking at an integral view of your cost. Shall we do the following? Shall we try to get a little bit on a few hands-on examples of both IT cost allocation and a little bit beyond that on the EBM phase?
Definitely.
So what I'll do a quick short demo of things that we've seen at clients. Okay, so as promised, a little bit of a sort of like practical overview. And of course, we have not so much like hours time. We can do demos that last for 3 hours, but I'll try to keep it into 10-15 minutes. And let's start a little bit with the end in mind. The whole idea around TBM is to get to a unit cost and a volume to be able to allocate out to different business units. And the example that I'm showing here is an example of applications, and then the price per application or per seat of that application times the volume that actually exists for different business units in a certain month being allocated. So really a bill of IT in a certain month. And I'm going to show that in a Power BI view, because we know that a lot of companies have their own BI tooling, of which Power BI is one that is present. And maybe as a question to you, do we care from CostPerform where the data is being visualized?
Not at all.
And how do we take care of the fact that indeed it can be accessed by any BI tool? How does that work technically?
Right. Yeah, we have a data warehouse export functionality which prepares the data in a way that it can be easily and intuitively picked up by any BI tool.
And that's through APIs to that data warehouse?
Basically.
Yeah, that's exactly what you see here being picked up by Power BI. And as an example, what you see here, you see all these different applications in a certain month. So this is in the month of January, for a certain business unit number 1000. You can see similar things for business unit 1001 and business unit 1002. Of course, all dummy data and examples. As you can see, I can see unit cost, I can see unit delivered, and I can see total cost. So I have a really granular overview of the bill of IT, and I see that for the different months coming about. That is like the really basic raw data as an invoice that you want to get out. But usually, since you have that data over several months, you could also think of different product trends. So if I would click up on a certain system, and once again, this is dummy data, you see these costs being pretty similar, but then all the way going down in June. But I can get a good overview of all the costs that are being in there. And let me get a big one, or not really a big one, but I can see things going. Once again, this is the end result of really modeling your cost and performance data. Let's try to get to the point, how do you get to this kind of data? And maybe as a first question to you, Bert-Jan, to get to this kind of information, and you need to model that out, that you do in your TBM model, I'm going to show that in a minute, but what kind of information do you need to get to that, and where does that information come from?
Yeah, you need to gather the different components from various systems usually. So you have your GL systems, you have your ERP, usually CMDB for your bill of IT. And of course, a large part and growing is the cloud spend. And you want to get that data directly from the source, so directly from your cloud provider.
But you want to, of course, match that a little bit of your GL line item on cloud costs.
Of course, yes.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. Okay, to get once you have gathered all that information, what you are actually going to do is build a cost model. And once again, I'm going to start a little bit with the end in mind. I'm going to start, and this is an example model for a government agency. I'm going to open this up a little bit, and this agency gets a lot of cost being allocated to them through that bill of IT. This could be on a monthly basis, and what I see as an example, I see that they get a lot of mobile cost based upon the number of mobile devices that they have. So there's a lot of cause and effect going on here to make sure that the bill of IT is actually really on an accountability level at that area. And just a little bit to show you how that works, if I would click on mobile, I can see actually what is all needed from an IT side to get to that mobile. And here where we get a little bit of CMDB information, what you just talked about, is that you really have to know, okay, my mobile consists of a network access, network services, and of course there's a little bit of management going on in there, and the real devices. Now, and if I click on the network services, I can see those network services are actually built up by different components as well. And now I'm in my IT services. That is the network services, and they are built up by the different IT towers, out of which one, and for those of you who are already TBM users, you would probably recognize the TBM taxonomy here, is I can see that data is a big part of that, and then data is built up by those cost pools again. So like very quickly you see a very transparent way on how the costs flow all the way from your cost pools, from internal labor, all the way through to a certain agency through all those steps.
Okay, so this is a relatively small model. What's the typical model size you see for TBM models?
Yeah, what you see here is, I think this is a model that's only, 250 objects. That's of course dummy. What we see about, you can easily see 20 to 25,000 different objects, because especially those IT services and IT catalog, and those can be very lengthy. And you want to capture that all, and it's in the data anyway. That can be quite big, and that's the reason why you need tooling for that, because in Excel you're not going to manage that on a very manageable scale. Yeah. And maybe also good to understand, and I really like that feature that your team has built, is that wherever you are in your model, you can always ask yourself the question, where is this money coming from, and where is this money going to? And as you have seen, I just clicked through a little bit, and I can do that again by following this external labor, and I get to network, and whatever I choose here, I can get to a different point. So I follow a complete different route here, and I end up at another agency.
And it's direct surroundings.
But one of the things, and I really want to emphasize that's one of the most used features on getting transparency in this, instead of it being a black box, is if I want to know where all this money for desktop comes from, I can right click, I can do a roll up, and I want to see all layers all the way up to my cost pools. Then what I can do is right click, in this case I do expand all, and all of a sudden, and it looks a little bit nitty gritty, but I get a complete allocation pathway of how that 111 million was being built up. I can see that most of it was in network services, and most of that was in voice, and I can see that internal labor is a very big part of it. So I can see that the internal labor that is being used on voice is making up 4% of my total 111 million. And that is actually 56% of the voice cost that we have all there. So what you get is a very granular view and transparent on where the money is coming from, and also the other way around, where it's going to. Having said that, let us also switch to an example where we are already a little bit more in the EBM space. So not only TBM, but EBM space. And I can show you how that all ties together. So instead of just looking at an IT department, we're now looking at a complete company. And this is a dummy bank company. And once again, I'm going to start at the end, because that's easy to explain. I'm going to start at a banking product, in this case of retail banking, and I'm going to start at a new loan. Let me make this a little bit bigger as well. What I'll do, I'll show you that I have this new loan, and all of a sudden I see elements coming in here that have nothing to do with IT costing. And one of my first questions to you, Bert-Jan, is we still see the same visuals. Now I have a little bit of coloring with that I didn't have in the other, but we see the same visuals coming in. So objects that allocate out to a different other object. In TBM, it was templated according to the TBM taxonomy. Here I see a bank. What is the level of freedom that you have building these kind of models?
You have complete freedom to build the structure that fits your particular situation or particular problem that you're trying to solve.
And what do you mean by complete freedom? Is that in the number of layers that you use to allocate? Is it the number of objects? Is that the number of attributes that are being used? So I hear hours, products, whatever?
Yeah, all of the above. So you can create as many layers as needed. Within that, you are free to create the level of hierarchies as fits your use case and the number of attributes that you need to fully model the cause and effect relationships and the elements that make up the way that your costs flow through the model.
Yeah, so what you're saying is you're not stuck to that 4-layer TBM model.
Correct.
And No, and I can attest to that because, of course, I work with a lot of different clients and I see that. I've seen a crazy situation of a Vietnamese bank where they use 272 layers and I don't know, almost 1 million objects or something. That doesn't really help in your transparency, but technically it was no limitation.
Yeah, correct, yeah.
So that's good. Hey, and I just want to emphasize quickly that if you look at this example of this new loan, you see activities, for example, of a back office coming in. So back office is processing the new loan. That's being done by back office staff. Those back office staff, of course, they have their wages all the way up from the top of the model. But as you can see also, and here is where the TBM ties in a little bit in the EBM, they are using a SAP suite, even a workplace that they use. And that is something that would be then coming out of your TBM endeavors because you've made a unit price of a SAP suite that is then being used by the back office staff. Here is an example, 7,000 users more or less that are going in there. And you can see that that SAP suite, once again, is being made up by license, by storage, by memory. So you see a little bit of the TBM taxonomy flowing in a complete model, and that's how TBM ties into EBM. So because at the end of the day, you have your full cost flowing through your model, of which a significant part is IT, but then flowing through these elements.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, with that, I'd like to conclude this very short and preliminary view of practical applications. If people would like to, we would be more than happy to spend another webinar to go really into depth. Maybe invite a client to do so together with us. Of course, not with their actual data, but with dummy data. So this is where it concludes the demo. I could have closed it before. And having said that, this is all for today, I guess. Once again, please keep posing questions. We have people in the chat trying to answer the questions also a little bit after the webinar. And any suggestions on extra webinars would be most welcome.
Yes.
Thank you, Bert-Jan, for joining me for the first time here on the webinar.
Pleasure.